There is a moment most high performers have had, a presentation, a race, a game, a conversation, where everything just worked. And afterwards, when someone asks how it went, you genuinely cannot fully recall. Not because something went wrong, because you were so completely inside the performance, there was no part of your brain left over to watch.
You're so absorbed at the moments of performing in doing what you're doing that there's no part of your brain left over to sort of be analysing it and storing it in that detail that we might otherwise. It can be difficult to recall.
That state has a name. That state has science behind it, and it has conditions that make it more or less likely. Dr. Sue Jackson is one of the world's leading flow researchers. She co-authored the defining book on flow in sport with the man who named the concept, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And what Sue has found changes how you think about preparation, changes how you think about pressure, and changes what it means to perform at your best. This is the show that brings potential into everyday life. This is Performance Intelligence. Can you give me a definition of flow and why is it so powerful?
Flow is when you're totally absorbed in what you're doing to the point that nothing else is entering your awareness that's not relevant to the task at hand. And it's associated with a number of positive characteristics such as not worrying about yourself, not worrying about failure or what the outcome might be, and being very clear on what your goals are and just things unfolding and in fact flowing. And that's how Csikszentmihalyi, the founder of the concept, came up with this term flow, was because he initially interviewed people in various domains, fully engaged in what they were doing, and they would say things like, it just seemed to be flowing from one moment to the next. So he thought that flow captured this idea well.
And you're right, the research, if I don't read this out, Shannon will say, our podcast producer, Andy, I gave you all this research. It's phenomenal, Sue. A 10-year longitudinal study found people in flow states were up 500% more compared to a baseline in their productivity. With skill acceleration, flow creates self-reinforcing skill development. The intrinsic reward drive, so that's that internal mechanism, pursuit of harder challenges, which builds skills further. So it's that competence, confidence loop we talk about. Well-being payoff, elite performers who regularly access flow report significantly greater well-being, emotional regulation and resilience. I've got a question. We'll wait a little bit longer, but about flow and fatigue. I find when I'm in flow, I'm much more energized. When I'm not in flow, I feel fatigued. And Frontiers in Psychology was talking about brain chemistry. Dopaminergic and noradrenergic systems underpin the intrinsic motivation and elevated mood of flow. It is neurologically real. The science is out there, unequivocally, categorically going to enhance your performance if you can have more flow moments more of the time.
I would agree with that statement.
You would say, I spent decades talking about this, Andrew. Now, you've got some beautiful sports psych examples. We do have a number of psychologists and performance coaches and people working in sport and performing arts listening to this podcast. We have a lot of other people in the corporate world who just like to learn some psychology or science to help them improve at work and life. So the example I give, it's a little bit left field, Sue. I don't know whether you would ever use this example. You're happy to use this after we have a conversation today. There's a movie clip from Old School. It's Will Ferrell, and he's talking about the Okinawa principle, and he gets up on stage. So we're going to play that track for our audience, and then I want to talk to you about the 3 simultaneous neurological shifts that happened to Frank the Tank's brain when he was doing this presentation.
Recent research has shown that empirical evidence for globalization of corporate innovation is very limited, and as a corollary, the market for technologies is shrinking. As a world leader, it's important for America to provide systematic research grants for our scientists. I believe strongly there will always be a need for us to have a well-articulated innovation policy with emphasis on human resource development. Thank you.
Where'd that come from? What happened? I blacked out.
I've had so many of those moments where I've been in flow and time transcends. Information recall is just bang, bang, bang. And I've watched back sometimes presentations or listened back and gone, Oh my goodness, I was on fire that day. You know, sound like a bit of a tosser saying that in Australia, but like you're in flow, but then come off on stage and one of two things happen. Someone will ask you a question, I'll go, oh, like my brain just feels like it totally shifts out of gear and I'm a different person and I can't recall, yeah? Or I don't remember a lot of it. And then say, look, how'd I go? So talk to me, what's happening?
So that's a signal of a deep flow experience, which we would call a peak experience if we were to refer to Abraham Maslow, who predated Csikszentmihalyi's work, and he came up with the theory of self-actualization and peak experience right at the top of that pyramid for Maslow, which is a moment of highest happiness, you can think of it as. Anyway, back to deep flow. You're so absorbed at the moments of performing in doing what you're doing that there's no part of your brain left over to sort of be analysing it and storing it in that detail that we might otherwise, so that when someone asks you afterwards, you know, what happened in this moment or this component of the talk, it can be difficult to recall. And I've heard athletes talk about that sometimes they can, and in flow both times, that sometimes they can recall, let's say, a race in great clarity and be in flow, but other times they might recall the starting gun and recall what happened when they were on the finish and like everything else was a blur. And so it is actually an indication of being so immersed in what you're doing that there's just no brain space left to also be analysing it in a way that you can then bring it back in a rational way, in a language-focused way.
I've got a personal question. If I don't ask this, I'm going to go, oh, you missed the opportunity. I find when I debrief with athletes, especially after big races, big fights, big games, they will be one of those two different sides and they are quite opposite. Sometimes a boxer, Tim Zhu I work with, had a fight that he won last year and he just said, yeah, he watched the video back. And this is where it's hard, like what's recall, what's video, that's also then going to that longer term memory. But he said even before he watched the fight back, he could recount a lot of what was happening in each round. So it was almost like he could look above and see what was happening. And I've had footballers say that also with a good performance. But then I've also had athletes. There was a footballer last year who was in a really, really big international game and he got man of the match. And he said to me later that night, I just said, hey, mate, good game. We'll talk about it in the next couple of days. You know, chill, you've earned this. I said, so, you know, your immediate thoughts? He said, I don't remember much of the game. He said, I can remember standing out there, the national anthem. I can remember like the whistle going. I can remember parts. He said, I don't know, but I was just so into it. He said, I can't really recall much. Now, he would have done a review and watched film to see it back. But yeah, two similar events. So athletes are performing to their full. Some have got recall almost frame by frame. Some can't. Yeah, I've never been able to explain that.
Well, that's a really interesting one, Andrew, and not many people that I talk with about flow actually bring that up. But I've certainly had athletes tell me about that. That's just like you have, that some performances they can remember frame by frame and others they just have a sense of it being amazing, but they don't have that detail. And I think a couple of the dimensions of flow are relevant. One is that and I know we're going to talk about this, the total concentration on the task. It's just that level of intensity of concentration becomes so absorbing that you start to feel one with the activity, which is actually another dimension of flow called action awareness merging. So you stop seeing yourself as separate from what you're doing. Whereas when you're sort of standing back as the observer, there's that point of distinction where there's this, it's like you're observing what you're doing. But when you get so involved, even that disappears and you just become one with what you're doing. So a cyclist might say they become one with the bike, a rower, they're one with the oar, with the crew, like there's not a separation. And then another characteristic that's relevant, I think, here with this distinction is what's called time transformation. And so you lose the sense of the ordinary passing of time. And so then you're back in normal time, perceptually, afterwards. And it's very hard for you to then break down what happened when the sense of time just disappeared during flow. So those three characteristics, those are three dimensions of flow.
I want to talk about clutch state. You hear a lot about this in football, especially a lot of American terms. They go, he or she was in clutch state and they're closing out the fifth frame. And so clutch state, the research distinguishes that from flow state. It shows in clutch state, it's deliberate concentration under pressure rather than effortless absorption. So do you see these as separate tools? And if so, can you train for both? What's the relationship?
Definitely they're separate. Clutch and flow are not the same. And you're right, clutch is much more effortful, and it's kind of like you're trying to rescue something. Like if you just think of what that idea of it's a clutch, like you're really trying to get through something or get out of something, and it's difficult, and you get there. And so on, and that can be very rewarding. And sure, you can train psychological skills for that. I don't study clutch state. I study flow state. I think they're very different, and I think it just muddies the waters to kind of put them together. So appreciate that you're distinguishing them here. And in flow state, by contrast, the effortlessness really stands out. That it's not that what you're doing isn't involving effort. It's actually involving very high level of effort because you're pushing the boundaries when you're in flow. So it involves a very high level of effort. But because you are so absorbed in what you're doing and you're bringing all of your attentional abilities and all of the brain is working optimally, the neurochemicals are in the right balance and so on for you to be able to meet the challenge, you don't have a sense that it was really hard work and, I somehow got through that. It's quite the opposite. It's a standout.
Yeah. So I'm wondering how you could prepare an athlete, because ultimately, your work doing sports psychology and my work working with athletes in the same field, you want to gear them up, and we'll go broader than athletes, we'll go performers for our wider audience. You want to gear them up for what we call performance moments, those moments that matter, to step up and be your best physically, socially, spiritually, psychologically. So training for flow, research shows, your experience shows, you can orchestrate that, but it doesn't happen all the time. And you can also come in and out of flow, as we'll talk about with your 9 dimensions. But would you have that in your back pocket for someone if they came down to, I'll use 80 minutes, which is a game of NRL or a game of rugby union. It's the 79th minute. You've got the fly half in rugby union. You've got normally the halfback in rugby league, and they have to kick a goal, or it's a clutch play. How would you prepare them for that? Just trying to get this juxtaposition between we'd love people in flow more of the time, but you're not always going to be in flow. So would you or can you prepare people for clutch? How would you go about having that conversation?
Yeah, I was just thinking of one of the Wallabies games from last year where they had the choice of taking a penalty kick for a draw or going for the try, and it was basically overtime.
Do you know how much more respect you suddenly have for me, Dr. Sue? and that moment you're talking about, I was at that game. That was Australia versus Argentina, so the Wallabies versus the Pumas. That was in 2025, and it'd been a bit of a wrestle, that game. And Australia had been awarded 5 or 6 penalties towards the end of the game, and we were in Argentina's half, so we're close to their goal line. We could have slotted a bunch of those penalties, but Wilso kept making the decision to move forward and to go for the win. History shows that Australia did win, so in those clutch moments or those flow moments that we went on to score a try and win. And what I love about that is, putting what we're talking into practice. So I've got to ask Wilso exactly what was going on in his head at the moment. But that was a real shift for a lot of those players that came out in the media after that and said, when Wilso just had the confidence to keep going, we had the confidence in him. So I really saw him grow and that connection and the team grow in that moment, in that game.
Yeah, that was amazing. Was that clutch? Was that flow? I mean, Harry Wilson and his leadership team, they were confident in their ability to get over the line, where you'd think, well, how are you going to get over the line at that point against a strong defence? versus taking I'll take the kick and, it's going to go over and we'll get a draw. But no, they wanted the win and they were focused on that goal, and that became everything. So all of their attention was getting over the line with the ball. And as you know, what a great moment for Australian rugby to see that happen. That was just amazing.
Injury time, we've got a penalty advantage here. And now what do you do, Michael Hooper? Harry. Sure. They're going all in. Iki Tau, there's no one there with him. He gets it away. The ball! They go all in and they hit the jackpot! Wallabies win in Townsville.
I guess full credit to the team. We could have went for goal there and taken the draw. It was a tough game, but everyone there believed that we could finish the job, and if the boys want to win a game, may as well back them. Everyone was sort of feeling the moment, and the crowd, there's 25,000 people pleading for us to tap it and try and win the game, and that really probably was the difference in the choice at the end.
At time of recording, it's the pointy end in Super Rugby. So while my role is with the Wallabies, those players all play for the 4 Australian franchises, so we just had a bit of a check-in. So I will make sure he listens to this and knows that there's one of the world's leading sports psychologists and who's contributed a hell of a lot to flow, was watching him in a flow moment. There you go.
Yeah, and I would be interested to know whether Harry thought it was a clutch moment, or did they transform it into a flow moment? As in, were they feeling intense pressure to desperately get over the line, or were they confident in the goal of getting over the line and all of the attention was put to that task?
With the power of editing, we might contact Wilso and get a bit of an audio grab.
Excellent.
And we'll include that in this, and then
I would love that.
Answer that question for both of us.
I think that would be amazing. I'd be really interested in the answer.
I definitely feel like it was a bit of a flow moment. I think all of us players were on the same page. We felt we had the momentum, and I think we felt we knew we were going to get across the line if we just had the opportunity to. So we just went with our gut and went with the feeling we all had, and obviously got the result in the end.
I was so absorbed by the win, I didn't go up to him at the end and say, look, was that the 9 dimensions of flow, or was that in a clutch state?
I mean, who wasn't? If you're a Wallaby supporter, like that was just an unforgettable moment. It really was.
You could totally hijack the rest of this conversation. We could just talk about Wallabies moments in the past couple of years, and we could just bin flow.
Especially leading up to next year, right?
Oh, it's exciting, isn't it?
Yes.
You mentioned a word a couple of minutes ago, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
Flow is a state of mind or a state of experience that we feel when we are totally involved in what we are doing. In the arts, for instance, for painters or musicians who, when a painter begins to fill a white canvas, a canvas with nothing on it, and the artist completely loses track of the time. They don't notice they're hungry, they're tired. They are just sometimes working for days without stopping, and they explain it as being completely carried away, almost like being in a river and the flow of the water takes them on.
I have a master's in coaching psychology. It was 2.5 years. I reckon 2 of those 2.5 years, Dr. Sue, it took me to learn to say Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. So I've got to honour the great man Tony Grant, who reinforced the importance of flow and taught us about Csikszentmihalyi. Hey, but you had a front row seat. So I don't really know the origin of this story. I just know that you worked with Mihaly. Can you go way back to when did you meet and how did that evolve?
Yeah, sure. And it's great to hear that Tony Grant helped you to become aware of flow, and the more people that are helping others to become aware like we are right now just by talking about the concept, there's more possibility for people to really experience a good life. And so we've mentioned that flow will enhance performance, and I just want to say right up front that totally true. It will enhance performance, but it also enhances the quality of experience.
Did I get the pronunciation correct? I'm a bit nervous.
I think you did a great job. Csikszentmihalyi. Excellent. I say Mihaly, and actually when I got to know Mihaly, he invited us to call him Mike because he did his training, he did his whole academic career in North America. And so it was just easier for people to not be stumbling on his name, his first name all the time. And so he was known to me as Mike and to others who worked with him as Mike.
So way back, when did you meet Mihaly, aka Mike?
I met him first through some phone and letter correspondence because this was in the late 1980s. I was studying at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I was studying a master's in sports psychology at that time. And I stumbled across the first book that Csikszentmihalyi had written on a library shelf, and I was just intrigued by the title of the book, which was Beyond Boredom and Anxiety. And I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. My curiosity was piqued, like, well, what's beyond boredom and anxiety then? And so I picked the book up, checked it out, and then I read about this state that I had experienced, but before having read about the book and the flow concept, I had no name for it. I had no language for flow. I'd never actually heard of it, even though I had studied human movement studies in Australia and studied a bit of sports psych at that time. Yeah, I wasn't aware of the concept. And so I became aware through reading this first book, which Csikszentmihalyi published in 1975. So this is a concept that's been around for a long time. It's not anything new. And I noticed that he was based at the University of Chicago, and that was a 3-hour drive north of where I was at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. So without really thinking about it too much, I reached out, and I think it might have even been by letter, posted letter at that time, just saying, hi, I'm Sue, I'm studying sports psychology, and I'm really interested in this state of flow, and I'm just curious to know, do you think it would be worthwhile to study it in athletes? And to my surprise, I got correspondence back fairly quickly, encouraging me and saying great context in which to study the concept, and can he be of any assistance, gave me his phone number, encouraged me to get in touch. So I did, and that's how it all began, just by me deciding that he was only 3 hours away, so what could go wrong by me just reaching out? And he was very generous, and other colleagues that have worked with Mike would say the same thing. He was always very generous with his time. He was always wanting to help people to further the flow concept through doing good work in the area. And so that became the very starting point of being mentored by him, yeah, which was great.
Having studied psychology and spending a lot of my working hours with athletes, with performing artists, with people in defence and military to get into more of those peak performance moments, I do have an intellectual crush on Mike Csikszentmihalyi. So it's lovely hearing firsthand from someone who not only worked with him, but who was close to him, but he was just sounds like a really nice person, gave back. And because
I totally gave back. Yeah, very generous, very humble. If anyone's read any of Mike's books, and I'd highly encourage anyone interested in this idea of flow to get hold of one of Mike's many books, you'll see that he's a very deep and wise thinker. Like he was working in psychology, and he was more than a psychologist. He was a thinker who was somewhat of a philosopher as well, and he brought in so many different areas of knowledge. And so to know that he was also personable and humble and someone that you could just have a chat with, for me, it was a revelation, a very positive one.
So when this young, fresh, and at the time inexperienced Australian woman living in America made contact with this not so young, probably not as fresh, but super experienced Hungarian living in America, then drove the 3 hours, you obviously connected. How did it then evolve to start working with him?
It was a matter of Mike himself had been an athlete. He was a climber, a mountain climber. As a younger person, he spent much of his young life growing up in Italy. It was during the war. And two pursuits that he was very interested in were climbing and also chess. and he developed proficiency in both those areas. I was invited by Mike to ask him for feedback as I was developing my my proposal, my research, my findings, sharing that with him. And that happened for my master's. And then I went on, Andrew, and did my PhD also in North America. And in my master's, flow was one component of what I was studying in elite athletes. In my PhD, it was the sole component. So it expanded, and it was a much more in-depth analysis. And I followed Csikszentmihalyi's lead, which was for my PhD, to interview elite athletes so that I was speaking with them in depth about their experiences when they were at their best, when they're at their worst, what their psychological state was, what helped them to get into flow, what made it difficult, and so on. And then along the way, I was able to get Mike's feedback. So that was how it began. And then I became an academic back in Australia, and after completing my PhD, and I, during a sabbatical, spent some time at the University of Chicago with Mike, and this idea for a book on flow in sports evolved, and we ended up writing a book together called Flow in Sports.
Which is sold all around the world, sitting on my bookshelf at home. So when I connected with you and then I went back to that, that's Sue. Wow, that Dr. Sue. So I had a bit of okay. It's really interesting when you meet someone who's done some work that you've not only read but has influenced you, and then you get to have the conversation and, through your experience talking about Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah, it was good, all those worlds colliding. The 9 dimensions of flow are 3 preconditions, or what sets the stage. This is from your book. Number 1 is challenge, skills, balance. Number 2 is clear goals. Number 3 is immediate feedback. Then there's 6 characteristics around what flow feels like. A lot of these we've already touched on. It's action, awareness, merging. It is total concentration. It is sense of control, loss of self-consciousness. That moment, how'd I go? Where was I? It's an altered time perception. And it's also enjoyment, and it's an autotelic experience. I mentioned I want to double click on one. I'd like to go more into the challenge, skills, balance, because my understanding is you get that right. That's the doorway.
That's a great way of explaining it, the doorway. I love that.
Great. And then how about you pick one? So I'll pick number 1. Which one would you like to go deeper on?
I think the concentration on the task. It's generally the one that people relate to well. Like if they were to give a layperson's definition of what it was like to be in flow, they'll say they were so focused on what they were doing. So maybe going to that one.
Okay, great. So let's start with challenge, skills, balance. The way I was taught this is a matrix. On the vertical axis was challenge, and on the horizontal axis was skills. So flow, Dr. Tony Grant said, is when you get a beautiful intersection of both. So you're being stretched, but you've done the work, or you've got the skills in your back pocket to meet that. So you get this beautiful intersection.
Yes, it is a challenging situation. Operationally, flow is defined as being in a challenging situation where you bring your skills to meet that challenge. And it's all an individual-based relationship. So if you think of an intersection of 2 lines, the vertical line and the horizontal line, and you think of 4 quadrants, flows that top right quadrant. And in the middle, where challenge and skill intersect, that is the individual's average level of challenge and skills. So you always have to move beyond your average level of challenge. That is, you have to extend yourself. You have to go into a place where there's some uncertainty, like, we're going to get that ball over the try line. And then you have the skill set that you bring to the challenge. And when you get to a very high level of performance, it's not so much the objective skills, if they could be measured, but it's your trust in those skills at that moment when you are extending yourself, when you are welcoming the challenge. Do you trust the skills that you've developed over many, many years that you can apply them in that situation? And so you've got what's called the challenge skill balance, and just a little bit more fine tuning is that it's not exactly that they're the same, it's that the challenge is slightly outweighing the skills, the flow.
Can you say that again? That's new information. Yeah, I like that.
The challenge slightly outweighs the skills. Stephen Kotler would say by 4%. But I don't think that we need to worry about numbers here, because the next channel of relationship of challenges and skills is called control. It's very close to flow. And when you're in a sense of, when you have a sense that you are controlling the situation, your skills slightly outweigh the challenge. And so if they were exactly the same, you're kind of like bordering between controlling and being in flow. And so to distinguish control from flow, we think of flow, challenge yourself just a little bit beyond what you think you might be able to do. And controlling it, you want certainty, kick the goal. You know, in that Wallaby example.
If challenge is less than skills, and I'll put this into the corporate world, I work with a bunch of people behind the scenes, some CEOs and leaders now doing speech writing. And it's not always on a big stage, entertainment, crowd, annual conference. It could be the weekly meeting, which so many people get really nervous. It's so nervous just speaking in front of others. Yeah?
Yeah, for sure.
But for people who've spoken quite a lot or are doing any skill quite a lot, if the challenge is less than the skill, does that lead to boredom and you have to manufacture enthusiasm?
Eventually, yes. And so there's actually what's called the 8-channel flow model, and there's 8 different experiences, 8 different psychological states that are predicted based on the relative balance of challenge and skills. And more than happy to share that with you if you like as a visual.
That'd be great.
Yeah, because it is easier to comprehend when you see it. Yeah. So if we think of flow as top right, then comes control, then comes relaxation, which everyone enjoys being relaxed for some of the time. After relaxation comes boredom. So if you stay in a place where your skills outweigh the challenge, initially you just relax into it and it's like chill and this is really easy, you're not extending yourself in the gym or at work or whatever, you're just feeling relaxed. And then ultimately, if you stay there, you won't stay there, you'll move into boredom. And that's not a great place to be. We can't concentrate well, we can't produce good work, and we basically don't enjoy being bored. And then if we continue on, it gets worse. It's then called apathy, where you can't be bothered doing anything. And that's not a great that's probably the worst state of all to be in. It's very difficult to move from a state of apathy. People might know someone or have felt that way themselves for a period of time. You don't want to be there. You want to move out of there. You probably need to get some psychological help to move out of there. And then we move from apathy to worry. So this is where the challenges and skills are starting to be such that you're upping the challenge and you're just not sure about your skill level for it. And then next becomes anxiety. That's where you're really worried that the challenge is just too much and you don't believe in your skills. And most high performers will experience anxiety at some point. And interestingly, it's actually not that far away from flow. So if we could welcome anxiety rather than want to crush it down, we might be able to help us move into flow. And then there's one other state between the anxiety and the flow channel. That's called arousal, high arousal state. And that's like if you're going to go give a presentation, say, or you're going to go play a game of rugby, or you're going to get in the boxing ring, you want to have a high state of arousal. You don't want to be feeling super relaxed, right? Not if high performance is your goal. And so that is a very neutral state, and from a physiological point of view, a positive state to be in. If you can be okay with what's happening when you're in that state of heightened arousal, like you might be feeling butterflies in the tummy, you might be feeling that your heart rate's increasing, you might be feeling that your throat's getting dry, you might be feeling sweaty palms. These are all states of heightened arousal. Now you can say to yourself when this happens, oh no, I can't do this. This tells me I can't do this. And then you shift into anxiety. Or you can say to yourself, I'm ready, let's do it. And you can either stay there or shift into flow. So there's a lot of different options there.
Just that agency you talk about, I can tell you've coached, you've mentored, you've had discussions hundreds and hundreds of times with athletes and teams. And that's the power of front-loading these cognitive skills. So while we're talking about flow, a lot of what you're talking about are the skills, the mental skills that get you into the outcome, which is flow. So it's like the input is the mental skills, the output is flow. We'll put that model up. So those watching on YouTube, it's already come up on the screen. Those listening the traditional way with your ears to a podcast, we'll put that in the show notes. It's a really good model as you talk about that. I'm loving the conversation, but I'll bring back to what you were saying, that the stretch is when the challenge is just outside your skills. So that group, or where I find myself doing work with people on Succession and invariably involves a presentation, or with people doing presentations. I've worked out a framework after doing 2,500 presentations. I thought, so I better sit down and try and have some sort of intelligence when people say, how did you do that? And I go, oh no, I've just done a couple of thousand presentations, but there is a process. It's the 4 S's. I always start with story. So start with a blank canvas and a story, and then how are you going to move people? We then go towards slides, whereas a lot of people just start with slides and you end up carbon copying the same presentation from 5 years ago, and you look at pulsing in slides and then adding music and layer and pictures. Then we go with skills. So there's speaking skills of voice and oration, and then body, like your body is actually a skill when you're doing a presentation, and then state, how you control your state and their state. And I had an example with a large insurer 2 weeks ago. 3 of our team were presenting, and I was working with all 3. And 2 of those 3 especially just said, well, I could see, we got feedback. It was the best presentation they'd done. And they were both in flow. We did a lot of work beforehand, but they got up and they'd done the work and they were stretched. For me as a coach, colleague, but as a coach for them in this context, God, it was good, because I could see they were enjoying the moment and they were almost having that, fuck, this stuff works. So you could see there's that consciousness and then getting back into it. It was beautiful to watch. So they were both in flow, and we didn't have a discussion about, hey, we're going to get you in flow. But as I'm reflecting, talking to you, it was really that whole beautiful just stretch. The challenge was just above their skills and they both stepped up to it.
Yeah, stretch is a good way to think about it, isn't it?
Anything else on challenge, skills, balance? That's the main thing.
The main thing at a high level of performance, or with elite performers in whatever domain, is the skills component. Because to be at an elite level, you've got the skills. But if you are continually challenging yourself, then there becomes the potential for a bit of doubt to creep in. So you wouldn't be at that elite level if you didn't have the skills, but just by virtue of being at that elite level doesn't mean that you're always going to be confident in your skills. You probably notice that yourself with work with performers. That you think, oh, well, they must just be confident because they're so good. Well, that's not the case. And I've seen that across different domains, and that little bit of uncertainty can just sow seeds of doubt, and then you're focused on that rather than performance. You've taken some of the focus away from what you're doing to yourself and can I do this? And that, well, first of all, you can't be in flow in that sort of questioning state, but also you might allow then the challenge to become in your mind too high, a bit overwhelming, and then you'll shift across into anxiety. And that can be detrimental for your performance.
Total concentration. Csikszentmihalyi calls this the signature quality of flow, and you've done a lot of work on his research, looking at effortful attention versus effortless attention. And before you explain that, I've got to say the basics on this would be, hey, get off your mobile phone. The basics on this would be understand the way that social media, the way that the world is set up, media, advertising is set up. It's trying to steal your attention. This is the number one thing I say with athletes when I first start working with them, Sue. The opposite of concentration is distraction. I just wanted to get that out there, because in all domains I work with, everyone's saying, oh, how do I get this peak focus or concentration? First of all, to me, it's 101, bit of housekeeping. Get off the distraction, work out what distracts you. Turn off, like when I start working with someone and they give me permission and I see them on their mobile phone or Bluetooth on their watch and they're looking at messages, you're never going to get into flow. You're an idiot. Like, as far as it comes from a brain point of view, get off distraction before you even look at total concentration. I'm off my hobby horse.
Oh, no, well, it's a fact of how we live in society at this present time, where we're technologically driven in such a way that, when are we not with technology? And do we cope when we're without any technology? And then the technology, particularly from a social media perspective, is all about distractibility. It's about shifting your attention every few seconds. And so if you spend a lot of time doing that, you're actually training that as a skill. You're training the skill of distractibility. You're training the skill of being able to keep your attention on something for a few seconds and then looking for the next bright, shiny object, which is exactly what social media works from, that sort of principle.
We're doing a big role at the moment with a global trading company called Optiva. We're doing a program as we record here in Sydney and also with their staff in Singapore. And we've looked into a lot of the research on distraction, because you can imagine you're a trader, markets come on different times around the world and they'll often trade 1 or 2 time zones throughout the day. And if they're distracted, that ends painfully, and it's measured with a scoreboard called revenue and trading. So some of the research we've looked into this recently is distraction starts external. So it starts with the Bluetooth notification. It starts with the mobile phone. But as you're saying, then you're setting up a performance habit and we're training our nervous system that then we go looking for distraction. So it starts external, and then that locus of control comes to, hey, I've been doing something for 2 minutes. This feels abnormal. Now I'm going to distract myself. It becomes deeply seated in the basal ganglia. That, when I read that research, it made sense. And at the same time, I went, wow.
Yeah, not good.
This is much, much more controlling than we ever thought. When you then start distracting yourself because it's what your nervous system is used to.
Yeah, no, it's not good. It's a challenging situation. How do we get beyond that? Well, remove the distractions wherever possible. Train attention. We can train attention. It's a skill. We can train our ability to focus in on one task in a very narrow way. We can train our attention to focus internally in a very narrow way, say on our breathing. We can train our attention to focus in a very broad spanning way. So if we're playing on a pitch or field, that we can take in all the relevant areas of the field, but be totally focused. Or in a broad internal way, which is where we're taking in our whole body, like my posture, my breathing, my level of tension in different areas of my body. So these are ways in which we can distinguish different types of attention, and we can train each one. And then it's about knowing, well, what's relevant at any point in time. If my goal is to meditate, then probably an internal narrow focus of attention on the breathing would be optimal. If I'm going to perform a kick, hit a ball, I want that narrow external focus on that particular moment in time and what's happening there and so on. So we can train our attention, and we can all get better, and we could all benefit by getting better at being able to concentrate.
It rolls off the tongue. You're showing the mastery and how much work you've done in this. You don't get that elegant and that eloquent in your wording without having done it over and over and over again. But for someone who's starting, if I just go back and unpick what you've said, it's like you're zooming in and zooming out. So there's times where your concentration will be more macro, and there's other times you're saying it's more narrow focus. Micro. Yeah. How do you train that? And we'll, again, bring it back to a corporate perspective. A leader who needs to do a one-on-one coaching session and control their state or a presentation, so they're more microscope. Then you're looking at the overall culture, rhythm of the team. You're extending out. How do you train the difference between the shift in that microscope versus telescope?
Well, first of all, it's an awareness that there are these different ways of paying attention, like what the visual field is or the attentional field is. and then knowing what's relevant to your particular performance and this particular point in time, and maybe assessing what your skills are at the present time, or getting a coach or psychologist to help you assess those. There are different self-report measures, for example, or a coach observing you who knows you well, can tell you whether you're very good at this type of focus or not. And then practices. So mindfulness is an excellent practice. We can have mindfulness practices that are very internally based, breathing, body scans. We can have externally focused mindfulness practices, so we're paying attention to the sounds around us or to the detail of what we can see in our field of vision and so on, and what we're going to pay attention to. So the person that you're referring to, the executive coaching one-on-one, are they able to maintain the eye contact appropriately? And you can train that. You can observe and reflect and get better at that over time. Also by having a level of appropriate arousal inside, so that you're able to give your attention to the other person, and it's not like you're constantly coming back to yourself and like, how am I doing here? What do they think? And am I giving the right amount of attention? Am I speaking properly? Like all of those questions have got nothing to do with you being engaged with that person at that point in time. They're all perhaps excellent questions for reflection afterwards, for training for next time. But at the point in time, you want to cut out the evaluation and focus on the task. If the task is to engage with the client in front of you, then give your full attention to the client in front of you. Listen well, show that you're interested, and ask appropriate questions and respond to the interchange and so on. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I'm processing two different parts of that. One is, I haven't heard that nuance on mindfulness. There's the internal and the external. I love the definition of mindfulness, the ability to be present in the moment without judgment. You've given me a different lens. So I like that. I like that internal versus external mindfulness. The second reflection, or the second thought, as you're talking about this, there's a red thread that goes through everything you're saying around that intersection between challenge and skills, self-awareness. That takes time, and some people work it out themselves, or you can fast track with someone like you.
Mm-hmm. Self-awareness is key to change. It's the necessary first condition to change, is to have the self-awareness about what needs to change or what you want to change and where you're at right now. And being able to do that in a mindful way is to do it non-judgmentally, like you were referring to Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition of mindfulness a moment ago. And one of the components of that is that you're paying attention non-judgmentally. You're backing off that evaluative component.
Yeah, another very intelligent psychologist, Jon Kabat-Zinn, who is branded as or known as the mindfulness expert. He's got a broad range of work. Like looking into him, he does a lot of work. He's done a lot of corporate work, a lot of sports work. I think it just put him on the map with mindfulness. But yeah, that's one highly intelligent human being. I do want to talk about what happens when you're not in flow, because we've spoken about the science of flow. We've spoken about 2 of the 9 dimensions. And as I said, you and I could talk about half a day unpacking all that. But there's an open loop. I said earlier in the podcast, it was around flow and energy. So my hypothesis, no research, this is just more art or feel, is when I'm in flow and I'm working. So speaking's an easy one, coaching. It's when there's an energy exchange where I am coaching, teaching, speaking, delivering, podcasting. When I'm in flow, it's energizing. I think when I'm not in flow, it is energy depleting. Have I just made that shit up, or is there some constructs or some...
You're spot on. It's very interesting, because when you're in flow, you're doing something effortful. You're pushing your boundaries with that challenge skill balance. And it's often quite intense. And yet it's such a rewarding experience, and that's where the neurochemicals come in and so on, the dopamine and the endorphins and so on, that afterwards you feel energized and you are happy. You have enjoyed that time of being in flow. it's like you're on all cylinders. And then when you're not in flow, yes, you might still perform very well. You might grit it out, or you might tough it out. You might push through. You might clutch state through it. But it's draining.
So when you're not in flow, two very intelligent psychologists back in 1999 called Jackson and Csikszentmihalyi said the following: flow is always a peak satisfying experience. It is not necessarily associated with peak performance on every occasion. I found that significant because even you and Csikszentmihalyi, who are really pioneers in this field, are claiming that flow doesn't always equal winning and that it's not always required.
Winning is generally not something we have a lot of control over, right? What we focus on and performing to the best of our ability and challenging ourselves, we have control over those aspects. So you do that to the best of your ability, you may get into flow, and you may be against an opposition that outperforms you, so you don't win. You may still perform really well. So I think there's a big difference between successful performance and winning, because I think ultimately we should be basing success on performance improvement.
That's that performance potential gap. If you've performed at or very close to your potential and you've given it everything and you still haven't won on the scoreboard, you've still won in many other ways.
Yeah. And then, yes, you can win without being in flow, for sure. And that's where you're bringing in other qualities to somehow get there, or be the last man standing.
The Stephen Bradbury.
Yeah.
But how do you teach that? Because imagine people have got to this far in the podcast going, I want more flow moments more of the time. I want what he and she are having. But I imagine that would create an anxiety if someone is just purely reaching for flow and you don't have it some days for whatever reason. How do you teach, or how do you position that?
Yeah, that's a very important question. It's not helpful to have as your goal, I'm going to get into flow, and because that's making flow an outcome that there's no light switch or no pill or chemical that will just trip us into flow. A lot of conditions have to be right, internal and external. And so have the goal to perform and execute to the best of your ability, make those very specific, clear goals. That's one of the conditions of flow, actually, to help you get into the flow state, is to have clear goals, proximal goals, that is goals that are very relevant to the performance that you are engaged in at that point in time. And then at the same time, what goes along with clear goals is called unambiguous feedback. That is clear and immediate feedback, that you take that in, that you tune into the feedback. And we do get feedback all of the time if we develop our awareness and openness and receptiveness to the feedback. And so we have the goals, we take in the feedback that tells us how we're doing in relation to the goals, and we focus in on what we're doing. And if we do those things and we have that channel skill balance right, we may get into flow. Or we may get close to getting into flow. But we will definitely have a more effective, efficient, productive performance and a more enjoyable one than if we don't do those things.
I like the deliberate choice of the word may there, may. So it's not this dichotomous black or white may. If it happens, it's a bonus. But if it doesn't happen, you can still perform at a good state.
I think that's the case for most of us. I think that there are some exceptional individuals, and often we find these in extreme sports, who the adage is, I'm in flow or I die, because of the nature of what they do. And they're extreme outliers. Most of us, we're not operating in that space.
Extreme sports intrigues me, and how you make something effortless that is potentially risking your life. The duality in that, for most people, is crippling. So to unlock that, there's something special going on, isn't there, in those extreme athletes?
There probably is. There's probably, they're drawn to this area of pushing the boundaries that far. However, if I think of someone like Alex Honnold, one of the best climbers in history, free solo, for example, or Taipei 101, where he climbed in Yosemite without any protection, and then one of the tallest buildings in the world, again, without any protection. One thing that I remember Alex saying when he's asked about the risks that he takes is that he likes to separate risk from consequence. So while the consequence of not succeeding, as in falling, is very bad, the perceived risk for Honnold is very low because he has been so well prepared for that. He has trained so that his challenge skill balance is pretty well matched there. He's definitely extending himself. He's putting himself out there, but he still is trusting, because he has reason to trusting that he can do this. And so I think that is an excellent way to approach when you are dealing with extreme situations.
From a mechanical and practical level, when you say that, I totally get it. From an emotional level, I still have palpitations. I've seen that footage. They call him Spider-Man, the way he just climbs up without ropes on Yosemite, which is a very, very difficult climb. And some of the biggest buildings where he's like literally pinching with his thumb and index finger hundreds of meters above the ground. And there's like, I get what you're saying practically. Emotionally, I'm not there yet.
And you notice he's generally smiling as well.
Yeah, he literally looks like he's having a party. Party for what?
Yeah, he's found the ways to extend himself by having those opportunities to challenge himself in those ways, and he's extremely well prepared.
So deliberate practice versus flow.
Well, I think deliberate practice is probably a very helpful way to make flow more likely. Would you think so?
Yeah, I'm going to a skill that's pretty foreign to me. When I watch someone play guitar or an acoustic guitar, or I watch someone play piano, and you can tell that they love it, and it's that two-way interaction. They love it, audience loves it. It's just that flow between the audience, because there's group flow, right? I do want to talk about that. But to get into that, they've obviously had to do what Erickson says is really deliberate practice, not just banging on the keys. So yes, I would think the question, if you do more deliberate practice, breaking down a skill and short, sharp burst of that, I would absolutely think that's going to increase the likelihood of one, getting mastery or working towards mastery on that skill, and then two, having more flow moments, and three, then being able to transcend and have that experience where you feel like you're on the balcony. So that external view we have of imagery, where you actually are almost on the balcony watching it in action. So I think that would all start with deliberate practice, yes.
Yeah. And there's a time for that, and then there's a time to trust the process and trust your preparation and allow yourself to become absorbed in the performance as it's unfolding, rather than analysing it and evaluating what happened or what might happen, being able to, and, our minds do that constantly. They're either in the past or the future, and that's what mindfulness does. It helps us to become aware when our mind is not in the present, and then it gives us a toolkit of how to bring our attention back to the present. And that's an ongoing dynamic process. So I've talked about the importance of focus. Equally important is refocus, the ability to notice when you are not focused on the present moment. You're either in the past or the mistake that was made, or you're worrying about what is coming up. And to notice when either of those are happening and to reset. The more quickly you can reset and bring yourself back to the present, the less time out of being in the right place at the right time is occurring, and the less negative impact on performance. It's very hard to sustain over a long period of time 100% focus. For an 80-minute game, for example, 100% of the time focused, possibly for a few individuals on a couple of occasions, but it's about knowing when to be switched on and when also to be able to switch off.
You see me nodding profusely. You talk about social contagion theory, those mirror neurons in the front part of our brains. When someone shows up energized, engaged, good energy, connected, the room starts to catch it. Someone shows up tired, shitty, cranky, disconnected, the room starts to catch it. I'm catching flow from you, Sue, because when you're talking about focus versus refocus, I just went, it takes me back a few years ago at Manly Sea Eagles when I first started working there. And a few of the players were getting caught up on, I can't focus for 80 minutes. I said, you don't have to. What do you mean, bro? Like a lot of the boys call me bro. It's when you look at the research, on average, or a higher level, but we do a lot of the training on this from a physiological point of view, it's 4-minute cycles, and then there's a break in play, and it's another 4-minute cycles. So the ball in motion in rugby league with the rules changes NRL has brought in, it's up around high 50s, finals, and I think a grand final, Brisbane versus Panthers, last year was 59, almost 60 minutes. So it's in play a lot, whereas in rugby union, it's about 1 minute 40. So getting to the point, when I said to the players, we're talking about 4-minute cycles, and I checked with the coach. So we really need to only focus for 4 minutes, and then you can wander off a little bit and then know how to refocus. I had a few of my players just go, wow, like really? I thought I had a problem, they were saying, because I can't focus for 80 minutes. No one can focus for 80 minutes. Break your 80 into 2 blocks of 40, break that 40 into 4 minutes, and then disconnect. And then we did some work on reconnecting. And that was a real shift in the way that I was teaching athletes to pulse, or in between, as you say, focus and refocus. So yeah, really interesting hearing you say that. Stress or positive pressure is going to help you get into flow, that balance, skills, challenge, balance we spoke about. But at your research, you also talk about performers need downtime after flow-heavy sessions. So we would call that strategic recovery. How do you teach that, the importance of that for our audience?
I think, first of all, recognising that it's not realistic for most of us to be in flow every time we need to perform or choose to perform. And that after performance, there is a downtime where we allow ourselves to recover physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever components have been involved in what we've been doing, and then rebuild and build up towards the next performance that matters. And hopefully that we can approximate or achieve flow in that next performance. So recognising, not practical to, flow is a wonderful state to be in. It's got a lot of positive aspect to it, but it's not an everyday state for most of us. Although I just want to put in a little box here that there is this thing called microflow where we can achieve flow in sort of more low-level activities, everyday activities. So we can have a life that is full of flow. But that's if we're talking about that high performance end where we're really pushing the boundaries, like the challenges up, there needs to be a time where we just have a time out, a recovery time, and today's training knows that, sports know that very well. We have recovery centres. First of all, they were just for elite athletes at the Australian Institute of Sport. Now there are recovery centres in almost every suburb that I live in.
Professor Shona Halson, and I'll make sure I send this to Shona, another Queenslander, wonderful research and academic. Do you know Shona?
I'm familiar with Shona.
Yeah, so yes. She put together the recovery protocol at the Institute of Sport, and we had Shona on a previous episode, and Shona said, and this is right, I see this in elite sport, yes, athletes understand recovery is important. And I think in sport, we're nailing the physical recovery. So the parasympathetic activation, getting the heart rate down, there's Normatec boots, contrast therapy, nutrition, massage, stretching. The growth area, and Shona said this is the real area for growth. And it's different because individuals, it's an N=1, one size fits one. But it's that psychological detachment or the mental recovery. So that's an area that I'm really looking at or playing with a number of my athletes and teams. Because you can have the physical, but someone's still flat mentally. I think linking into what you're talking about on recovery and flow, you've got to have that pulse. So I think that's the big area in sport where there's a lot of room for growth. But if I bring it back to our wider audience, I cannot tell you how many times I'm still talking to a corporate audience and we talk about that balance between stress and recovery, and they're just not doing it. And I blame the original Olympic creed, Citius, Altius, Fortius, faster, higher, stronger. And people have caught on to that, but they did put in 2021 after the gap year Olympics in Tokyo, communicado, as I said earlier, community. I would have loved if they'd gone Citius, Fortius, Altius, recupadio, faster, higher, stronger, recover, physically and mentally.
Yeah, for sure. And so ways that one can do that is to find something relaxing that is relaxing not just physically, but also psychologically. And often that might involve community, having fun, doing something social, or it might be going out in nature. That's an excellent way to recover in terms of just, especially if your work, your performance is got a lot of technology, like we've both got a lot of technology around us right now. A nice way to recover after something like this would be to go out for a walk in nature or along the beach. How beautiful is that to be able to walk with bare feet along the sand and hear the ocean and have your feet in the ocean and hear what you hear, the waves and the seagulls and so on. And that can be a really lovely reset from a psychological point of view.
Do you do that? Is that part of your practice to have deliberate, strategic recovery? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I've found that especially as I get older, it's so important. And I certainly didn't know that, and it wasn't part of training when I was an athlete as a young person. It was always, push, 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 push. Thankfully now the absolutely critical role of recovery is understood. But I think anybody that wants to do well in whatever field it is that they're working in, not necessarily elite athletes, they're recognizing that importance of having downtime, of having recovery time, relaxation time, and good sleep is part of that, of course. And to build that in means that you can function better and you can enjoy the times when you are on.
I've loved today. I've got to disclose now, I was both excited and nervous at the start of this, because when we connected and I went, that Dr. Sue Jackson, that Mike Csikszentmihalyi, you have helped put flow on the map for millions of people. So I was a combination of nervous talking to you and really excited. And as we've flown through this conversation, it's much more excitement. The examples you've got are really rich. I can see that you've not only studied this, but you live and breathe this. So for people who want to contact you, who want to work with you, what's the best way?
Oh, thank you, Andrew. And it's been very enjoyable speaking with you. It's been challenging. So you've helped us set the stage for flow experience here, and thought-provoking, and I hope thought-provoking for the audience. In terms of contacting me, best way is my website, drsuejackson.com, and you can reach me, and social media handles are on my website as well, and always welcome communications from people. I do a lot of my work online, and so you don't have to be based in Brisbane, where I'm currently based, to do work with me. And I work with people online around Australia and around the world.
To keep that theme going, where hopefully the challenge is just a little bit above the skills. I like hearing that you've been challenged, especially with your expertise. Let's finish with the flip. Is there a question in preparation for today that I didn't ask that you'd like to discuss? Or the flip, is there a question you'd like to ask me before we wrap up? I
think you've covered a lot of really interesting areas. I think that you've picked up on what we've talked about and really allowed the conversation to flow. So thank you for that. I think there are many areas that we could touch on, but I feel like this has been very comprehensive. I was wondering, do you feel like that you experienced flow in our conversation?
I have. I just looked at the time.
Yeah, likewise. I can't believe the time.
And but honestly, it feels like we've been talking for 15 or 20 minutes. So yeah, did I experience flow? Absolutely. And I said to you during the conversation, I've thought this a few times, I want to come back to that. I find, and I'm sure you found this in the work you've done when you're in an interviewing role. As an interviewer, I try and do two things. When I first started interviewing, I was hopeless because I came from a keynote background. So I was talking I listened back to some of the first discussions around a podcast. It wasn't a discussion. It was tell. It was a train wreck. But as an interviewer, I like to ask questions and learn and then try and hold the thread of the conversation. But my brain's racing ahead because I really want to come back and listen because I know there's a whole bunch of stuff that I just need to sit. I like listening to podcasts when I move. I'm very, like physical literacy is big for me, physical intelligence. So a slow bike ride or a slow walk and I'll listen back. So I'm really looking forward to that, to listening back. And two things have come out of today. One is I've learned a lot as an athlete making a bunch of mistakes. You and I have got similar history. Good athletes, not great. Probably left our best performances on the track, on the field. And when we really had to step up, didn't have the skills to step up. So I could perform in low level meets, but didn't have the skills to go the next level. Through a lot of study and practice, I feel today a lot of what I'm been teaching is aligned with what you're doing and Csikszentmihalyi. But I've also got a bunch of things today I'm going, I need to dig into that or I can start doing that better. So it's both supported some of the work that I've been doing in research going, Dr. Jackson concurs. And, hey, there's some areas I need to explore. The mindfulness, just the different nuance you had on mindfulness was a really good one. It's very simple the way you explained it, but just really getting that gap between challenge and skills and then that shift, if you don't have that, come back to the gratitude, the appreciation. I think I can bring more of this into the corporate work I'm doing, the corporate coaching than I've actually been doing. That's a reflection I want to spend more time on.
One thought that I just had there, listening to you, you recounted some key points there, Andrew, is something I said right at the start is flow matters for a number of reasons. I would say that Csikszentmihalyi perceived and taught that most important reason was the quality of experience that we have as we journey through what we're doing, and that it lifts the quality of the experience. And when you think back, when anybody thinks back to best moments, was it because you got the medal or you achieved some certain outcome, or was it the experience you had during it? Like, I know for me, it's often both, but definitely that quality of experience, it just makes ordinary experience special. And I think that's important to recognise, because ultimately the quality of our experience, this is a quote from Csikszentmihalyi, determines the extent to which life was worth living.
Well, can I thank you today for adding to the quality of experience for me and to our audience, understanding flow, understanding it's not the precursor to performing all the time, but if you can have more flow moments more of the time, you're also going to have a better quality of living and better experience of life. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.